Hey there, guys. I'm back, and this time I thought we'd get right into how I did some of the sound design for Collider. Um, so the first thing I was going to talk to you about is the sound here, and I'll just play it so you can hear what we're getting into. Okay, and in context of the track, it sounds like this. Okay, so you kind of get the idea. So first thing I'm going to do here is tell you, basically, when I started working on this tune, I was in this mood to try to make a kind of an orchestral sound library, like a Hans Zimmer thing, so I could make, those super cheesy Hollywood style, overly dramatic orchestral arrangements. So that's why this timpani was kind of the first sound I made for this competition. I wasn't really planning on making a neurofunk track. I just was kind of like, oh, I want to see if I can make some orchestral sounds. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to turn off all the effects on the output, limiter, all that stuff. And then I'm actually going to turn off all the effects on the main bus. So you can see here that this timpani bit crush, all of this stuff sums into, all these outputs are set to bus 2. And this orc perk hits is set to input is bus 2. So in Logic, this is called a track stack. And it basically just allows you to bus things more simply. Okay, so the first sound is that guy, and it's really quiet. So what I'm going to do is turn the volume up here. I'm going to have to probably turn that up even more. Okay, I'm going to turn off all these effects. I'm going to turn off that send. So that's the sound right there. Okay, so what's going on there? This is a really simple patch. I'm basically using these 2 pulse waves. And I dialed the frequency of that one up approximately an octave. And I have this unison turned on for that. And I've also got this noise oscillator. So if I turn the noise off, it's just kind of this really boring pulse wave thing. That kind of gives it that rumble of a timpani, I kind of thought. Okay. And then I have this key track thing on, and I've got a little bit of the envelope set. Because if I open it all the way up, it just gets super noisy. So just let a little bit of that rumble through. And then, of course, just all the standard stuff where you're making a kind of a percussive hit. I've got a really short attack on the filter envelope, longer decay, and a long decay on the amplitude. They call it a loudness envelope. That's cool. So that sound, it sounds all right. It's nothing I'd get too excited about, but I could see the potential with it. So let's look at how I did the effects on this. So the first thing I did is apply a little bit of compression. So that's quite a bit of compression. Getting about 4 dB, tickling at about 4 dB when it's playing. And I'm just doing that to kind of trim some of the transient. You can see that. It's just kind of trimming it down. The next thing is this directional mixer. And with this off, there's a lot of stereo in this sound, which sounds pretty cool. If I turn it off, it completely puts the whole thing in mono. And I just didn't want to have a lot of stereo stuff going on in this low timpani. I wanted to be right down the middle. And it sounds cooler in the headphones with it off. But it'll just get too muddy later when I add more elements. Okay, now my favorite plugin ever. If I were you guys, I'd always try to have a overdrive or distortion plugin. It's kind of your go-to plugin. I use this distortion plugin, overdrive, almost on every single track that I've done. in almost every instrument because it just adds a lot more warmth to the sound, and you don't have to go crazy, get some like 808 kind of grimy thing, but just tickle it a little bit gives you just a little more muscle in the sound, type thing, which is always a good thing to have. Okay, and then this guy, the W1 limiter. Okay, this is a free plugin, and this thing is awesome. If you don't have it, Google W1 limiter, go get it. It is by far one of my favorite plugins because you can abuse it so badly and still get such a good sound out of it. And I also love that there's no visual feedback on the plugin, so you're totally relying on your ears. And you can see I didn't run this thing into it too hard. That gets a little too rumbly, but just up here at about minus 6 or 7 dB threshold, you start getting a lot more volume out of the thing without it clipping, and I think that sounds really good. And then finally, the last thing I have on here is a little shelving EQ. I'm just taking a little bit out of the sub range. That's without and with, so really subtle. But that was just I actually didn't do the sound design with this. This is more of a mixing thing. Okay, so there's kind of the timpani sound. So that's a start. So if I solo that, okay, that is not the greatest sound in the world. So what I did was Logic has this, if I hit Command D, it's a duplicate feature. So now I've got a new track that has the exact same setup as the previous one. So I did that here, and I basically used the exact same setup, except I added a bit crusher, I think, instead of the overdrive. So this is just a kind of your classic bit crush effect. And then what I've done is I've high pass filtered the whole sound. So you get this kind of like tearing sound. In fact, I probably could have gotten rid of more of this mid stuff, but oh well. So that's just yet another layer to add to this timpani to kind of give it some more character. So together, those kind of sound like. Okay. In fact, I probably need to turn this one up. So what you're getting there is you're starting to fill up the frequency spectrum a little bit. So if I just play the timpani by itself, there's just a ton of low-end info in there. And if I add the bit crush effect, we're starting to get kind of a big sound that's the weight of the intro. And so that's going to fill up the frequency spectrum whenever it hits. But still missing something, in my opinion. It's still missing kind of like impact or weight, however you want to call it. So that's why I created this sound called smack. And that sounds like this. So how did I make that sound? I'll turn the effects off. I'll play it again. Oops. Okay, that's no effects. This thing's really quiet. So again, I've got this pulse oscillator. I only have one, and I've got the noise. And basically all this is just a way to kind of gate the noise. So if I play that, really short attack, semi-short decay, and kind of keeping the amplitude envelope kind of solid. Now, if you look at the spectrum, there's a lot of low end going on here. And if I'd realized that before, I probably would have gotten rid of it. Oops. Oh well. Because I'm really interested in this area and what it does audibly when I layer it. Okay, so again, just kind of the same stuff. Trim the peaks. And I'm using a really aggressive compressing on this. And you can kind of hear how much brighter and louder it's getting. Now, of course, it's peaking like crazy. That's a little bit better. So to me, the compressor just kind of tightens it up a little bit. And again, I'm going into my overdrive. That's adding a ton of more volume. Okay. And some more warmth. And then again, the W1, this time I'm driving it insanely hard. But now you can see I'm getting massive amounts of volume without clipping that channel. So that smack is kind of like if the timpani player was like, you know, really hitting the drum really hard, you get that high frequency part of it. Okay. All right, let's add that all back together now. Okay, and without the smack. All right. Turning the smack back on. Okay, and so you can see now, even in the frequency spectrum, it's kind of even looking in span. The way I have span set up is so when it's kind of flat, that's what sounds good to my ears. So you can see that. With every hit now, we've got some serious frequency content for the listener to kind of key on. So adding that high-end stuff, this smack and this bit crush, kind of give weight to the timpani. The final piece, and I'm not going to go into this sound that much because it's just a typical hi-hat, that sound. I actually added this layer to the sound. I added that during mixdown because it just needed a little bit more on the high end to kind of shine through. So all those together. Okay, and I'm clipping my output a little bit. So you get the idea. So that's kind of how I layered it up. All right, so then when everything's going into this bus, what did I do? I use this overdrive effect to give it to kind of as a glue. So I'm using the overdrive as like a compressor to kind of glue all those sounds together so it kind of sounds like one drum and not four different sounds. So if I play it with the overdrive on, actually I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Off. Okay, so I've turned these volumes up, so it's getting driven a little too hard, but that's okay. You kind of get the idea. It kind of just roughens it up a little bit more. This enveloper, if you're not familiar with this is a transient shaper, and what this thing did was give me a little more attack. Okay, we'll get into that next. Okay, and then again, I just have an EQ here. I'm bringing the lows, scooping the low mid a little bit and boosting the highs just to get a little more even sound. And then I'm going right into this limiter. Okay, so this is getting way too loud at this point because you can see how much gain reduction is being done. That's ridiculous. We don't want that. So all the sounds going into here are still too loud. I'll just turn this down a little bit. Yeah. And so apply enough gain to the limiter. I don't really care about the gain reduction, except I'm just waiting to hear if it starts distorting or sounding bad. This is basically, again, to trim the peaks and buy myself a little bit of headroom. Then I'm going into a reverb. And again, I really like how that sounds with just a little bit of reverb. And I think what I did here is the crossover frequency is 500 hertz roughly, so I'm not applying reverb to the low end of the sound. And that's a really important thing to do. You don't want to necessarily have a big echoey space for your low end for a track like this because you want the low end to be sort of tight and not muddy and gross. So that's one trick you can do with this particular, it's called Platinum Verb. It's just a stock plugin. Then I have this single EQ. I'll talk more about this in the arrangement, but the idea with this guy is that it allows me to automate the sound so I can take the low end out when the main drums come in. So I can still use this sound, and audibly it doesn't really sound any different except that but I really want to clean the low end up on this sound to make room for the kick later. Okay, so that's all that makes up the timpani kind of sound. Okay, so that's it for the timpani. Next, I'm going to talk about this orc, perc, aux, and smacky drum. So I'll see you next time.